quick one today, but I wanted to touch on something for the majority of people who have $5,000, $10,000 that they're looking to put to work in the crypto market this cycle, expecting that come the top of the bull cycle, they're going to have enough money to retire. It may come as a bit of a bombshell, but that's probably not going to happen. Certainly not if you don't hit that 1000x token lottery, which we all aim for. And of course, we're trying to position ourselves to get involved in any of those feasible opportunities that we see, but it's very difficult to predict. And more often than not, it does come down to luck. When looking at building portfolios that have that certain element of fundamental analysis, when we're looking at what actually makes sense for future network potential, and all of those flags that we look for when making sound investments, we're probably not looking at 1000x return the majority of the time. We're looking rather for a 10x, a 20x, a 100x even. However, if you're starting with 5,000, 10,000, or anywhere around that number, it's going to be very, very difficult to get that retirement money, certainly within this next cycle. So with that being said, in my mind, you have two options here. Firstly, you look to utilize this cycle coming and then the next cycle. Don't veer away from making sound investments and building a strong portfolio for those meme and moon coin lottery tickets, at least not with any serious amount of money that is a detriment to your main portfolio, because you can just lengthen your time horizon. It is a ticking clock, and I've talked about this before in terms of me believing that, over the next cycle or two is pretty much going to be the last chance that I think we have in terms of getting some of these astronomical returns. And I use the word astronomical, relatively speaking, to the stock market or for real estate or business returns or most business returns, in terms of, even a 5x being astronomical in comparison to, the 7 to 8x that's typical in some of the investment avenues that are available outside of crypto. So, if you have $5,000 to $10,000 there, utilizing this crypto as a building block, this cycle as a building block for the next cycle is probably going to be the better option for you. You don't need to retire. Well, depending on who you are and what you do. But chances are you don't need to retire and go for that mega millions jackpot this cycle. You can set yourself up, get some solid returns without rolling the dice too much, and set yourself up for that stage 2 retirement fund where your starting bag in the bear market is at a level that it's actually going to be feasible with the returns that we expect to put you into retirement mode. You're still ahead of 99% of the investors out there who aren't involved in crypto, right? So you're still getting a leg up. You're just not being greedy and you're zooming out, right? You're elongating your time frame to make sure that you're not making any, or you're not forced to make any silly decisions in the interim. Now, choice number 2. And I'm speaking specifically to those who don't necessarily have large amounts of dry powder to inflect into the market as we build our portfolios. This is going to sound taboo, and this certainly isn't for everyone. And again, it is very important to note that I'm not a financial advisor. I don't know your personal circumstances. I'm just laying out the facts here of what I've seen, what I've experienced. And as you start going up that hierarchy into folks that have more money, you're going to start seeing more and more people that are more comfortable with the idea of leverage. Now, it's important to note what I mean by leverage. I run a lot of different businesses. I have a lot of assets, or certainly in comparison to probably most people. And so as I've started to build that level of comfortability, the idea of leveraging against those assets, whether that be things like home loans, equity loans, business loans, the idea of borrowing someone else's money to fund the growth potential or the investment potential of my own assets simply makes sense, especially if the rates are at a point where they make sense. I'm able to cover the costs, and I know that my economic climate and the structures and the processes that I have in place are able to cover that. It's not for everyone. But for those of you who don't necessarily have that huge amount of dry powder, relatively speaking, of course, even if it's a 50,000, 100,000, as you start reaching those numbers where getting them into place right now during the bear cycle could actually mean retirement and a lot more wealth come the bull cycle when, we look to start taking profit near the top. It's going to take that amount of money. And so if you don't have that right now, you do have the idea of leverage. Now, you've probably read a bunch of business books. If you're anything like me, you know there is such thing as good debt and bad debt. I'm not talking about racking up debt on your credit card. I'm not talking about racking up debt through personal loans that you know you're probably unlikely to be able to pay back, at least comfortably. I'm talking about taking out leverage positions against assets if it makes sense in your individual situation. To me, and this is just me speaking, and I'm going to tell you as transparently as possible, when I look at the crypto market, I see something that is potential to never be seen again. If I'm looking at even making a 10x or a 5x in something like Ethereum, for instance, which to any of us who have been in the market for a while seems like somewhat of a no-brainer, right? So if I'm in a position to take out 100,000 equity loan on something, for instance, like a rental property that's already cash flowing, that I know I can still cash flow and pay for that loan should I need to in the event that this money is just lost, then I'm going to do that because that's going to allow me to, at least in my mind, make a minimum of a 5x on that initial money over this next cycle, and therefore put me in a much more preferable situation monetarily than I otherwise would have been. Now, this is a dangerous game to play for a lot of people who don't have necessarily that amount of experience. So it's always important to really take an analysis and ask for some professional assistance when looking at the feasibility of you taking out leverage positions. It's not for everyone, and it can put you in a very dangerous and precarious situation if you're not structuring it properly. If you're getting rates that aren't necessarily going to be good for you, if you're not doing it in a way that makes sense on paper, and you're simply just racking up your own debt without any more feasible income coming in that's going to be able to cover that in a worst case scenario. This always comes down, and look, I'm always going to be transparent with this, in any kind of venture, in any kind of investment, it always comes down to what that risk and reward are. What's the payoff like in terms of the risk being associated with that play? Now, for a lot of people, a lot of my network in particular, some of these guys are doing very well, and girls are doing very well. And so they have put themselves in a financial situation where leveraging and loans, it's just part of business for them. It's part of their day-to-day life, whether that be personal or professional. So they become a lot more comfortable with it. For someone who's looking at this for the first time, it's very, very easy to take the stance of, don't get yourself into debt for X, Y, and Z. That, of course, is true as well, but it's the type of debt that you get yourself into that's really going to make the difference. And so there are ways that a lot of wealthy people are able to leverage to expedite their wealth journey quite a bit. In fact, I would go as far as to say most people out there who you would consider to be rich or extremely wealthy probably didn't do it without borrowing some money. I remember reading some business book by a guy called Duncan Bannatyne 20 years ago. And they asked him what his secret to wealth was. And he has a lot of money. This guy's a billionaire, obviously. And his secret to wealth was to borrow, borrow, and borrow. And when you can't borrow from the banks, go and take some private money. When you run out of private investors, beg on the streets, because it takes money to make money. And I'm not trying to convince anyone here watching this channel to put themselves in a precarious situation. But to be honest with you, in order to do my community a justice, when I'm looking at this upcoming crypto market, when I'm looking at the copious amounts of money that's coming in from traditional finance, from those financial entities for the very first time in a lot of instances, and we're going to start seeing those funds matriculate through the crypto system, I think it's more than not a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to whatever degree we see it playing out in the next cycle. And so it would be doing a disservice if I didn't give my 2 cents in terms of what I see as a feasible and realistic leverage play for a certain percentage of you out there. I fall into that category as well. I simply don't have enough dry powder to really take all of the positions that I'm looking to take over this next cycle. We've talked about sacrifice. We've talked about people who are looking to put themselves in situations by getting a second job, by selling things, by really just gaining any amount of dry powder money, investable finances to put into the market while all the prices are down. And that's fantastic. And that should be the first port of call for the majority of you out there. But for those of you who do have assets, who do have some kind of circumstances in life where they're able to smartly leverage positions in order to take thoroughly analyzed and researched gambits into the crypto market, I don't think it's necessarily the worst decision to make. And that sounds taboo. I totally get it. There's a lot of people out there who would completely disagree with me. Any financial advisor out there, in fact, would probably disagree with me. But I don't use financial advisors for that in that capacity. They're not there to make you a lot of money. They're not there to tell you how to go against the system. We've all heard a lot of people out there talking about the matrix, for instance. And it's true. We have the capacity to be completely entrenched in our day-to-day corporate job, whatever it may be, and never actually get out of that rat race without being somewhat creative. And sometimes you've got to roll the dice in creative ways in order to make those big moves. And it takes bravery. It takes a certain level of trust in yourself, in the decisions that you're making, and only you can decide on that. But there we have it, and it's an important note because I don't want anyone to get discouraged if they don't have the capacity to take out some larger sums of money to invest, if they don't have the dry powder available outside of the couple thousand they're about to invest. Simply in those cases, play it a little longer, which sounds, that delayed gratification narrative is an important one. It's one that a lot of people don't have. That patience, that conviction, that goal. You hear about people writing down their goals and trying to get there eventually because it helps. And I would say that very much the same. You have 2 cycles here minimum, right? In my mind, in order to make the kind of money you want to make. So as long as you have that in mind, you don't need to win the lottery this time around. You just simply need to be making strategic, intelligent, smart decisions. You don't have to roll the dice too much and look to risk all your funds just because you want to make sure you're hitting that $1,000X token. That's probably not going to be the case. Most of those fall flat, as we know. We want to focus on things that have the fundamentals in place, that have the structure, that have the potential. Then, as we start progressing through this cycle and we start taking profit, we start setting our positions again about a year out from that top again. So as we're starting to take our positions now, we're going to do the same thing next cycle. And so don't be discouraged. However, if you think you are able to take those chances, you are able to leverage yourself intelligently, then this may very well be a good time to do so. Certainly in terms of cycles past. I know there are a lot of people out there saying that we've heard it all before. This financial, traditional finance is coming into crypto. It didn't happen before. If these ETFs don't get approved, from my perspective, and we'll go into detail in this. Certainly, if you're a part of the Patreon, we'll be talking about this as soon as the Discord is up and running too. We'll make sure we're having some private conversations in the investor group as well. Please join if you haven't had a chance to join. Or take a look. The link should be in the description below. But, we've heard all this talk before. In my mind, from my network, from a lot of the research that I'm doing, this is the biggest cycle I think we're going to see or have seen. Bearing in mind the law of diminishing returns, which on paper should indicate that we're not necessarily going to see the same returns as we did, and certainly in terms of X's or market cap of crypto in general. I think we're fighting against that a little bit. I think that we're putting ourselves in a situation where crypto is going to see an explosive period of growth right now while we're trying to find our feet. And before the regulations come in and the military elements come into play and cut us down so we're not necessarily in cowboy land anymore and we're not necessarily able to make those same returns, I think we have a finite amount of time to put well-leveraged, smart leveraged money to real good use and set ourselves up for some major success. Feel free to ping me in the comments, my email too, benkage@yahoo.com. Please hit me up if you want to be a part of the investor group. The Patreon, as I've said, link's going to be below. But bear it in mind, guys, don't hate on me just because I'm being transparent. There are intelligent, smart ways of doing this. And of course, we can discuss that in finer detail. But I do want to make sure that you know your options. And you're also smart enough to make sure that you're making the right decision in terms of which options you go with. All right. I'm going to move on today. I've got a lot to do, but I shall see you all on the next one. Thank you.